Welcome to the first episode of Future Form with Lauren Franco. Today I'm joined by Jordan Weber, a New York based regenerative land artist and activist whose work lives at the intersection of environmental justice and social repair. Jordan collaborates with communities in historically redlined and industrially polluted neighborhoods from Minneapolis and Detroit to Red Hook, Boston, and Des Moines, transforming contaminated land into places of resilience, healing, and gathering. His projects often blend ecological restoration with political action. What I hope this episode does is give Jordan space to talk about ideas that don't always fit neatly into a gallery or an article, ideas about community, resistance, and what it means to imagine and build more just environments through art. Let's get into it.
Future Form with Lauren Franco. Lauren Franco. Future. Future Form. You're listening to Future Form with Lauren Franco.
Welcome to the podcast, Jordan. I want to start with this question, which is how do you describe yourself as a creative? You've been called an artist, activist, land sculptor, regenerative designer, and what feels most true to you? How would you describe yourself?
Probably a regenerative ecology sculptor. I keep switching it because it kind of gets usurped or stolen or taken out of the real true nature of the terminology repeatedly because of bad actors in our field. So that feels most accurate, I would say.
And then for someone unfamiliar with your work, how would you describe what you actually do, both physically and conceptually, when you create these land-based or community-based projects?
Yeah, really, the first thing we do is identify the really oppressive environmental elements within a community, and normally that's identified before individuals even reach out to me. So I get um, invited into some of the most treacherous, environmentally treacherous and health damaged, both for the physical and mental elements of the built environment and us living in it to counter those structures of degradation. So the easiest way to describe that would be to reverse violence on land and body through the built environment. Obviously, hundreds of years of oppressive structures that really don't cater to the black and brown body. They, in fact, do the exact opposite. They break the black and brown body down over time in every single way you can imagine.
Mhm. To go a bit deeper into your projects, is there one current project, or I don't know if you can talk about any upcoming projects that you feel really shows this kind of work and you can describe for everyone?
Yeah, the main one right now is in Detroit, East Detroit, and to zoom in, Canfield, Detroit, which is a historically black neighborhood that was really torn to pieces with the housing crisis of 2008. And when I say housing crisis, I really mean that banks came up with a lot of illegal tactics to
Mhm.
decimate black communities. And that project is pushing in um, about 10 acres now. We've expanded the project of conifer species. We're trying to do it in a really diverse way that's still indigenous to that area of East Detroit. And those conifer trees surround the community, and at least in the heaviest hit area of that community around the Barack Obama Academy. And that is a push against this Stellantis Chrysler automotive plant. And to do that in a really effective way, you were talking about like data points and what actually works in the amount of time. We really have to sink in a lot of data with that strategy. We have the Detroit Ecology Center. Once our species of conifers, we're going to be transplanting a lot of mature trees so we can really see some direct action quickly. But a lot of those conifer trees, the needles themselves will be tested and broken down for the amount of particulate matter we hope to be picking up. So well, we know that the conifer trees are really good at picking up particulate matter, 2.5. but we don't know how much exactly it will in our project, so we have to test that as well. So within that 10 acres, there's a large community and forest bathing activation. And what that means is there's essentially a circular bridge that you can walk through the canopy of the trees to experience forest bathing, and then a central hub of that bridge is a community space that the Barack Obama Academy and countless other community organizations will be using. And the idea behind that is to try to mitigate pollutants from the built environment, but also mitigate toxic stress and trauma through green rebuilding, green landscaping that we know raises serotonin levels and has all these really fun scientific studies and peer-reviewed studies that reverse the effects of toxic stress, especially for youth. So it's this kind of verticality within landscape design and ecological restoration. We're kind of trying to hit both heads, restore a degraded environment, and then at the same time restore the mental aspects of trauma and mental degradation through gray infrastructure and police brutality and pollution and all the things that go along living within the inner city. So that project is, I would really say we've accumulated with a 20-year practice all the things that I've learned to push into this specific project. So, that really I'm hoping that that really is a blueprint for larger projects as well. That's the main one, and that's the one I always talk about because it's just got everything that I've ever wanted in a project, in that one, 10-acre space.
Yeah, that's incredible. Thank you for describing that. I think also you kind of get at this idea that the built environment has deep social implications. So to pretend otherwise is also deceptive. And that also kind of tying together this scientific data, but also this almost like social or aesthetic data, like they are completely linked and you really can't separate them, that these injustices are completely tied together. So I think the work you're doing is amazing. I'm curious about how these collaborations work and what does it mean to enter a community either or kind of as you mentioned before, maybe you identify an issue you see, you identify an injustice, and do you then see, okay, maybe my skill set can help this community? Or are you kind of invited into a community and then how do you
Mhm.
balance that like helicopter in? That's not really the approach you want. So how do you actually enter a community and hear their needs? Because of course there's data of and obviously the history of trauma, but to really hear what are people's daily lives like and how can you change them?
Yeah, for one, you need to spend a lot of time within that community so you understand it. And Detroit was different because I hadn't spent a lot of time there, like I have Minneapolis and St. Louis and almost every other city in the Midwest. But 9 times out of 10, I'm invited into that community by some sort of nonprofit or arts organization or community organization to have conversations with people, typically grassroots organizations, to see if they want to work with me. So it's like there's always some sort of middle grassroots nonprofit that invites me in. Who like Detroit, for example, and then St. Louis, they kind of get a pick from a pool of individuals that they want to work with. So let's say, for example, Sidewalk Detroit, they were working with individuals in East Detroit and West Detroit, and both of those communities were given a lot of options to work with practitioners like myself, and then they kind of narrow that pool down and then interview individuals to see who fits. So for some reason I keep getting picked for some of the areas that I've always wanted to work in. So from there, then you have to really build up the trust within those communities who invite you in. So there's a lot of neighborhood association meetings, bread breaking, town hall style conversations that happen. And those either go really well or they're really contentious at first, and then that through that contentious initial phase of the interactions, you either get pushed in more deeply or you're like you have to make a choice, like this is a toxic environment for them to have somebody coming in from the outside
Mhm.
and cut ties. And I don't think I've had a project yet where I've cut ties with um through that kind of engagement. So, for some reason, I'm really good at trust building, and I think it's just because it's a genuine approach to practice, and it's not extractive. So then that's about a 6 month to a year long process of engagement, and then building a design and a framework around what the needs of the community are. And that happens really rapidly because those individuals already know what their needs are because they've been living in those environments their entire lives. So that's really how that goes on the back end. And then I build a design out. Community votes on it. They say what they like and don't like. And a lot of times, the designs that I would like to implement get altered quite a bit because of the community wants it to look or feel a different type of way, which is how it's supposed to go. A lot of the projects aren't exactly what I want aesthetically speaking. 100%, I should say, maybe 70 or 80%. But that's the beautiful thing about the practice is I'm not tied with ego to the actual design phase of the project. So then once that design gets pushed through, at that same time I'm building a team of ecologists, architects, landscape architects, and engineers to collaborate with the community and the grassroots organizations. So all those things kind of fall in at the same time, and that's why it takes so long. I would say because you're always trying to pick the proper local teammates to merge, within the framework of the community and the grassroots already existing practices. So it's pretty complicated in that way, and at the same time, actually feels pretty natural at this point in my practice.
Thank you. I think something I'm thinking about in response to that is also, again, kind of back to this time scale and both
Mhm.
the amount of time that takes to bring all these people together, find the right collaborators, kind of go back and forth, maybe what a project looks like in the community, and also gain trust. When you visited projects, let's say a few years later, do you receive feedback on them? And how has that then influenced later projects? Or have there been unexpected challenges that you didn't even know until years after it was built? But also, how have then maybe communities also claimed agency for themselves? Like maybe the first project in the neighborhood, they needed an arts foundation and maybe someone like you to slightly maybe steer and find the collaborators. But then have you seen any communities, um, I don't know, maybe even take an idea you had further?
Yeah, it's a really that's the most complicated aspect of the project. So basically, that's the sustainability wing of the project, and before Trump got reelected, the sustainability wing was really a matter of funding individuals to continue that work or take it deeper, which Detroit has that. The similar projects in St. Louis, it's the same thing, but I've had both. And for example, the Minneapolis project is in shambles right now because the Youth Farms organization dismantled after 15 years, 2 years after the project was complete. Same with Omaha, the Malcolm X Foundation hasn't been in a position to really upkeep that project in the way that we all see most impactful. The hardest part of the projects are sustainability and who is going to actually continue the work after they're built. So they normally have these honeymoon periods, when they're first built, and then the kind of 2 year to 3 year, I would say, lifespan is where that real test comes through. You can really see if it's going to be continued or if it's just going to go fall by the wayside within 2 or 3 years. Then you have to rebuild that project or just abandon it completely. So Minneapolis, we're rebuilding it. Omaha is just an ongoing thing. It's just really, really tough situation in Omaha. Detroit's going to be a decades long sustainability strategy. And I'm just learning how to do that more effectively, I would say, the older I get, because you really have to focus on that sustainability tactic on the front end and not think about it afterward. So,
Mm,
because the whole time beforehand, you're thinking about how to get it built. When on the front, end, you really need to create those relationships and build those relationships where you're like, well, this nonprofit could go under. Is
mm,
there another one that can strengthen it or keep it afloat? Or does this project, in fact, do that for individuals? Does it, in fact, strengthen, resolve, and strengthen practices where nonprofits can merge together and benefit from the thing that we built together? And that is the sustainability wing of it. And
mm,
that happens sometimes, but that's like kind of the holy grail scenario. And I think that this Detroit project will be that because it's so large and the Parks and Rec are involved and the Detroit Ecology Center and countless other organizations where I think that if a couple individuals kind of flounder or dissolve or move, they will be able to fill the gaps. So it's a really tragic aspect of the project or the practice, but I think the alternative is to not act at all, which obviously isn't an option. But then the second one is, like I was saying before, if the programming fails, at least we have a ecologically kind of restored mini biome that we've created that can sprawl, until the developers come and, dig all of our beautiful work up and build
I
more
hope
great
not.
infrastructure on top. Right. So
Yeah.
these are the things that I'm weighing all the time.
I mean, it's a frustrating time to both have
Yeah.
these conversations, but also these conversations are essential right now. This is one of the questions I wanted to ask you going into this conversation, especially in the US right now. It can feel difficult to imagine what comes next when artists, educators, organizers face shrinking funding or limited institutional support, and just there's so many competing crises. What does imagining a better future look like to you in this moment? And where do you see the path forward to create community and creative
Yeah.
pursuits?
It's so hard right now because normally I would tell you that it's not as if for the past 400 years that we have been supported in a way
Yeah.
within our Black and brown and indigenous communities that has allowed us to flourish without there being some sort of complete annihilation or stripping of, like we saw in Detroit and then in St. Louis or in Tulsa,
Mhm.
Oklahoma, for example, with the massacre there. And I really feel that there was a very militant approach, and when I say militant, I say that in terms of self, empowerment and self determination of like the Black Panthers, for example, in the
Mhm.
'60s, where you were going to get and build that thing no matter what the scenario was. And right now we are seeing not only this kind of 3-year scenario with the Trump regime that is not only us waiting him out but also waiting out the burn through that is the long term
Yeah.
effects or the external effects, right? Because everything's being dismantled. The NEA, the EPA is, has been completely taken over and zombified. These are like this is probably a decades long or longer um, scenario for a lot of us. And I'm 40 now, and I'm like, what's the 10-year plan for me being 50 and struggling for this practice to stay afloat? And that's a new feeling. I haven't felt that yet, even in the most depressing and damaging um, I would say era of my practice, which was also the most fruitful in some ways in 2014, 2015, when Michael Brown was killed, when
Mhm.
Tamir Rice was killed, Eric Gardner, when we saw all these individuals for the first time on camera being murdered. It's a really scary time, and it's a time to really diversify practice with individuals that you wouldn't normally work with to see
Mhm.
if your practice can thrive and survive in a different way. And I can get into funding and all that, but that's a really boring thing. But we're seeing everything be completely stripped. And that long-term burn through, it's a slash and burn technique, right? Of an ecosystem. It's kind of the most damaging style of tactics that we've seen probably in 50, 60 years for a practice or a people.
Yeah, there really are no words. I mean, you make a good point though, which is that history repeats itself. If groups like the
Yeah.
Black Panthers had to fight to build something, you can fight to build something now. We can fight for something now. You've referenced 2014 Ferguson protests and how that shifted your practice. So how did that experience change your sense of what art can do? Like, when did you first understand that art could function as a form of direct intervention, environmentally, socially, or politically? Because I imagine some individuals in that moment could feel like, oh, maybe I need to shift my focus entirely to organizing, or they might not see the path forward through creativity. So, how can you speak on that?
Yeah, that and it's very clear because I remember the rage of that moment and the rage of individuals, around me. And it's hard not to get really triggered by even thinking about that moment because so many
Yeah.
black individuals were being so blatantly murdered. And like I said, for the first time we were seeing it on camera, where I knew that after going to Ferguson, a week 2 of the protests, so you have that first weekend and the second weekend I was there. I knew that if I didn't push the things I was talking about in my art practice, paintings and sculpture, I knew that if I didn't turn that into some sort of direct action, that I was going to do something violent, like a lot of other individuals were doing, burning things down. And the stupidity of taking that route and not seeing that the system in which the violence is being created is going to be able to rain more trauma down on you if you go that route. I knew that art was the only possibility to imagine some sort of future that was more just. And I think in 2015 we were pregnant with our first daughter. So I was thinking about the officer, I think his name was Wilson, who killed Eric Brown, and how he got off. I think I was thinking of, if I don't do something, what is this going to look like for the next generation and generations to come? Just like individuals in the 1800s and 1900s are thinking about their kids, right?
Yeah.
Um, so that's when I transitioned into really thinking about the built environment and what landscapes of trauma and what defensive landscapes could look like or could be. So I would say within 10 years, 11 years now, I've been able to traverse that out of probably pure rage and angst and
Mhm.
not really having the ability to fight this system in the physical way in which we really want to or wanted to at that time. So, yeah, art and landscape design felt like the next best option because that visual, just like the theater, of just like the films in which we've seen can really push into the millions just on the visual cue and the interpretation of a feeling of being severely oppressed. Just like that can happen in that sense. I think that art and the visual realm can do that, but then you have to think about the utility of it. Like, can you create a visually striking thing that then, in fact, does something for the individuals that you're trying to help? So again, a really long answer to your question, but those are the things that come to mind when you say, what was kind of the point of no return, the tipping point in that way.
No, not too long. I appreciate all your responses, and I think that's really important to hear that also it's like, how do you channel this anger and frustration into hopefully results or at least the creation of something. And so I guess that also has me wondering, how did you come to art at all? Is there a moment that stands out to you that you knew you wanted to be an artist? Or what was the first time that you felt like an artist? Was it always something on your horizons?
Yeah, my mom was an art minor from Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa. And we grew up, lower class on the north side of Des Moines, which is a city just like any other, but a, a large amount of refugees, this huge refugee population. So it's actually really, really diverse in a way that people couldn't imagine. And my dad at the same time was going through this transition from working at gas stations at night to you name the job, he had it, but to at some point chauffeuring for Jesse Jackson and Al Green and Al Gore, and then if Al Gore would have become the president, my dad would have been in the Secret Service for the Motor Brigade. Yeah, so I saw his rise, through a very tough scenario. So my mom from the start would take me to the Des Moines Art Center on Sundays, and I grew up looking at, it's got one of the best collections in the U.S. for a contemporary artist that people don't even know about, like Francis Bacon. I grew up looking at one of the popes in the electric chair pieces, and that always just would rip me to pieces, this painting, because I was so scared of it, but so, like, drawn in by it as well. So I always had that background of art, but then when I dropped out of college, I was working construction with my uncles and things were not good, and I was, selling weed on the side to pay for, like, paint, like oil paint, and had this really kind of, I don't know, illegal activist kind of by any means necessary hustle of making it in the arts. And I dropped out of college because I got hurt playing ball and my basketball career was over. So I knew that I needed a backup plan, and a fallback plan, and art was naturally always there for me. Growing up in a kind of more poverty-stricken neighborhood, and then knowing what that could do for me mentally. So that's kind of the background, and then where structures and landscape and architecture came into play was because I was actually building the things that individuals were designing for a good 5 years while I was trying to make it in the arts. So everything just merged at one point, and that merging was in 2014. But the origin story was my mom, and growing up using art as kind of a tool to foster a healthy environment for myself. And then at the same time, my mom's side of the family, which is the white side of the family, had my aunt and uncle had land outside of Des Moines, surrounded by farm because I was the most altered landmass in the U.S. So on Sundays we would go down, and some weekends I would spend with my uncle, and he would put me on game as to what monocropping is versus what the natural environment used to be. So I had a really fortunate situation where my uncle knew that my brother and I needed an outlet of walking in the woods. Um, and needed to be educated in this what this greenness was, and I don't think he might not have seen that, but he just knew that that was the right thing to do, and that was the origin story of the environmental stance of my practice. Was I knew what Iowa used to be through my uncle, and as a kid, was taught what it is now, which is the totality of colonial agricultural and colonial land management, and that annihilation of biodiversity is in exact alignment with annihilation of brown people and indigeneity. So all those things blossomed into this fiery, practice, which you see now. You know what I mean? Like this is a result of an entire lifetime of observing all the oppressive elements of a life.
I mean, that's great to hear the seeds of where this all came from,
Mm.
because I think also the goal of this podcast, not to hear the seeds of oppression, but no, the reality of what do you do in a situation of oppression? It's like, how do you
Mhm,
resist? And to hear how do you resist, and how also, I think for others to hear, like, where do you also find the seeds for this? I don't know, maybe a
mhm.
parent is listening to this podcast and hopefully, and they're like,
Yeah,
okay, maybe I can bring my kid to the art museum every
yeah,
weekend, and that inspires them to resist in a new way. So I
yeah.
think it's really important, and also why free museums are really
Or
important, and we need to keep
yeah,
museums
it's
free.
100% true. I walk my daughters to the Met, and you never know what's gonna spark some sort of, practice by just the little things of, investigation and discovery of the a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old's mind. It's pretty magical to
Yeah.
see what comes out of it.
Yeah, exactly. I'm also curious how the broader artistic community and other artists have both influenced you and responded to your vision and practice, and in what ways you've had to push back against certain status quos. Because in many ways, I think every creative person has to navigate being both with and against their community. So, how has that tension played out in your work? Or I think anyone deals with that in their own field.
Yeah, it's specifically like the tension amongst like other practitioners that might be counterproductive to my practice, or how have I been inspired by them?
Yeah, I think both. It's like who are you with, and then how have you also dealt with maybe tensions in the artistic
Oh,
community, or even maybe within yourself that you feel certain pulls maybe initially in your career, let's say like to maybe more gallery based art, and then kind of finding your niche and finding your people. Um, and I guess I don't even mean necessarily that you're like butting head to head with another artist, but more ideologically that you see certain movements in art and then you're like, "Okay, that's not what I'm for," or
yeah, I mean, it's really hard because the gallery world, like, I'm always, I'm in the studio and I'm making objects about the practice that I have in the communities because you have
Mhm.
to balance that, especially now, like I was saying, diversifying. But I don't want to work with gallerists because I don't like the idea and the extraction of it. But also, it's just such a false it's just such a false practice with that extraction, and it's monetary, and it just feels weird to me. So I would say it's more of that scene than individual artists. Now, artists that I always butt heads against are the artists who are seemingly, in a public sense, at the forefront of all the things we're talking about, but
Mhm.
only really make art objects about our fight. And I'm not saying that that's not part of the fight, but it feels pretty divorced from the actual movement when you have 0.5% of an artist population making 90% of the money off of the backs of the actual movement when they're not really involved in it. And that's infuriating, but also I think that at the same time, those individuals are putting something really potent and really beautiful in a white or institutional setting that needs to be there to represent the movement at the same time. So that's kind of the rub, I would say, is like, if you're going to be about it and paint about it and sculpt about it, like you got to actually be on the front lines with us when things are going down. But I don't know if that's even true because, like I said before, those individuals are probably doing something that, in its own way, is part of the fight in the movement. The artists that I really, shy away from are the ones that I just get bad energy from when I meet them. I mean, you could be a really great individual and a practitioner, and if your energy is really aloof or foul when I
I
meet you
agree,
face to
I
face,
agree.
yeah, because that happens a lot. Like, there's a lot of individuals that I've looked up to for a long time who I've met, where I'm like, "Well, I don't even know how you got to this point." But then at the same time, there's a lot of individuals like that I look up to, like Dred Scott, for example, that took me under his wing when I met him the first time,
That's
and
incredible.
that was at Smack Melon in Brooklyn at a show in 2015, and he like escorted me through this crowd of like hundreds of people to my artwork right when I walked in the building. Um, so yeah, it's just it's a crapshoot with artists. Artists aren't like the best people in the world. I can tell you that.
I think maybe all of life is just finding those mentors that will actually look out for your best interest and,
Yeah,
to your point,
it's true.
really guide you. It's super important.
And I don't know if you found that. Like, I'm sure you found an architect at Cornell where you're like, oh, okay, if I really go down this route, I know that I could probably sync my practice within their practice, or that they're waiting for me to do X, Y, and Z, and that you're being held up by them. And those are the people that, yeah, I think we just need to cling on to for dear life because you don't know who's going to be gone and who's going to help you with how the political situation is right now.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I think I've been lucky enough to find that, and to your point, you really cling on to those people when you find people that are both ethical and great people in person and create the type of work you wanna create. You kind of just
Yeah,
need to follow in their path, hopefully. So
I
I
agree.
really agree with that. Another question kind of related is, what artists, thinkers, or texts are influencing you right now? Or even has there been kind of like a pivotal text that really influenced
Yeah.
your practice?
Um, oh man, the biggest one in my like specific zone is Ecology of Commerce by Ethan Hawken, I think. I don't know if that author's right. It sounds like somebody that didn't write that. Is Ethan Hawken like the scientist or who am I thinking of?
I'm like,
Maybe
maybe it's
Ethan
also the
Hawken.
person's name, but
No, that's why it didn't sound right, but it's something like that. Ecology of Commerce, you could probably bring it up, and it's not Ethan Hawken at all. That was the big one, I think, that really pushed me down a more
Paul
direct
Hawken.
action. Yeah, yeah. So Paul Hawken is the author of Ecology of Commerce, or you could just leave it in there as Ethan Hawken because it'd be funny through your
Yeah, we'll
for
have
people
both.
listening. Yeah, where they're like, this guy's not like super intelligent.
No, no.
um, so right now there's a book, Insurgent Barricades, that I'm reading. It's like the history of barricading and it being a community kind of spur of the moment, cross cultural act of resistance. Where I'm making work about the origins of barricades right now because of it, and that's part of the kind of defensive landscape element of my practice. But always Audre Lorde. I'm always reading Audre Lorde and like Walt Whitman to like regain energy. Those two combined are, a lot of my inspiration in my practice. Also because I live on the Upper West Side and like Audre Lorde is always talking about, on this street on the Upper West Side and like you can like geolocate
Yeah.
um, her writing poems, by walking around my neighborhood. So she trips me out quite a bit.
Oh.
So yeah, I'm reading another book about um, the long term heat island effects of shade, or the counter effects of shade. And a friend of mine, Stephanie Henke, just brought that book from Berlin for me to read because she knows I'm always trying to build around shade and safety. Stephanie Henke founded Tactical Tech. She's really amazing, kind of juggernaut in all sorts of ways and positive ways. So those are the three that I would probably, or four I would say off the top of my head. Always some Japanese like sci-fi mixed in when I'm like bored because
Yeah.
I'm like deep down a sci-fi nerd through and through. It's just like undercover.
I love that, and I also appreciate you kind of saying that it's like you go to, Audre Lorde and Walt Whitman to kind of, like, regain energy or to maybe, like, avoid burnout or frustrations. We all need those things that we continuously return to that kind of refill you up maybe when you kind of get low. And so I also wonder what are other almost like tactics you have to avoid burnout, but also I think it would be great if people get an idea of what is your daily creative routine so that people almost understand how maybe they can become more creative as well. Are you sketching, walking, meditating, listening to music in the studio?
Yeah, it's all of that. Like I don't meditate as much as I used to. I'm like a huge Zazen, Mahayana Buddhist kind of practitioner. I have been since like junior year of high school, and I don't
Oh.
do that as often. And I think it's because I have kids now, and we live in Manhattan, and I'm just so burned out at the end of the day. I don't have any time to do the very thing that will center me, like the thing I'm supposed to do. So yeah, the breathing exercises, that's really important. So like if I we drop the kids off, I get coffee on days where I'm not going to the studio right away, or if I don't have meetings right away, I'm really walking around Central Park or Riverside Park, or hanging out on the back end of the Natural History Museum where the Nobel Prize kind of monument is. That's kind of my safe zone to start the day. And within just the built environment of New York City, like that's why I'm here. It's not only because of all the projects and the proximity to the projects, but it's the monstrosity that is New York that energizes you just by going outside, and the really beautiful architecture and the little nooks and crannies of beauty that you find in the city amongst all the other craziness that really motivate me to like either go straight to the studio to do that work or to do something else. But normally I'm not much of a sketcher. I'm normally just a doer. Like the studies themselves come out of massive failures, or I should say that in a different way. Doing the studies are these large works. So a lot of studies come from drawing, but I normally do the actual work, and that is the study, and either a really great success and I can continue it, or it's a massive failure. And I learned these little things within that failure that I liked or didn't like that I'll push on to the next element of that idea. So yeah, it's a really physical, constructive way of doing it. Like construction, when I was doing that with my uncle, you're just building these things and then you're problem solving as you're building it. So I like to work in that way. There's a lot of discovery in that way that I find a lot more interesting than like planning a whole project out.
Yeah. I guess then maybe a question to end on, which maybe this is a cop out question a bit, but finally, what's a question you wish more people would ask or think about when it comes to art, land, and justice?
Who has the power, I would say, in that, especially with art. With land and justice, we know who has the power, but with art,
Mm,
the structures in which things are funded and the ways in which people gain access to other things that get them funded or get them a lot of wealth that is then um, hoarded. Who has the power and the agency within that, especially now, and who is hoarding versus who is distributing in a way that is for the collective good. Derek Adams is really good at sharing like resources um, for individuals to come up in a different way, versus other artists that I know that will just buy, you know, real estate to hide money abroad. Like that's how much wealth they have. Who who has the power, and who can give us access within those power dynamics? That's what I wish we would ask more, because normally those people are in the room that you're asking those questions
mm.
to, and they're not coming to the forefront because they would rather stay in the shadows and hoard the things that they've amassed off our backs.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a good point to end on, and I think that actually should encourage all the listeners to maybe make a, like, actor's diagram of who has the power in the art world, and we can publish that together, kind of see where this power lies.
With some
Um
demands behind it, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think that is actually an inspiring point to end on. Maybe we all have a mission,
Yeah.
but I can't thank you enough, Jordan, for
Mhm.
taking the time to come on this podcast, to be the first guest, and to share your ideas and creative energy, which is clearly great energy. I hope this conversation gives listeners a sense of how art can serve as both a tool and a process for collective repair, and a reminder that imagination itself is a form of resistance, to your point.
No, that's a great way to yeah, that's a great way to end it.
Thank you so, so much for taking the time.
No, it was my pleasure, and
Thanks for listening to Future Form with Lauren Franco, where creativity meets climate, culture, and change. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. I hope you enjoyed this first episode, and I'd love for you to join me for more conversations to come.